Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Dougherty. I am a first-year student here at Bowling Green. I'm an MFA candidate in the creative writing department, specifically with poetry. And I'm really excited tonight to be reading at Prout and be reading a mixture of work I came to the university with and work that I've been developing here since the start of the semester. I would say themes in general that I try to focus on a lot are travel, heritage, and family. Um, I say themes, and to me, really, it just feels like I've been writing the same poem over and over again my entire life. Um, and I just hope that the redundancies within these poems can be called themes, I guess, if that makes sense. But yeah, I would love to start with a poem that is called Pittsburgh and the Rest. The busted hulks of mills wait, obsolete and grand in their silence. Jazz floats over the grass of Shenley Park. My father smokes most of the day. I'm not sure when I'll see red-tailed hawks bomb through autumn or when the basalt flow of the Monongahela will carry me to a lock that requires an offering, six-pack, and cigarettes for the operator to grant passage. Now, I climb 3 flights to my door in a land without hills, these wooden stairs, a rundown choir sounding beneath my weight. From the gutter, a steady drip of water won't stop, its persistence pulling at what is left of the time spent chasing Gilbert's ghost in the Cyclades, watching love dwindle outside stone fields, of the time spent in Kamakura, wandering over black sand beaches to rest beneath a bridge and feed apple cores to feral cats. Of the years after, under Pittsburgh's gray ceiling, the steel and hills taut and reaching to maintain their skyline as I struggled most days to wake, this doorknob swivels in my hand. You see, I know I should have swallowed the keys to the homes where I've lived, or melted them down for a crucible, molded them into coins, forged a currency of origin, anything. I could have stashed them in my pockets and listened through the black slush winters for the river's coursings, Pittsburgh and the rest jangling with me as I crossed the river and the bridge. This next one I'll be reading is called Odokertaig Arindukas, which is kind of the traditional Gaelic pronunciation of my last name, along with my family's words, which translate to mean our inheritance. So, Arindukas. I am old enough to stumble through the door with my father, drunk, to partake in hushed rummaging through cupboards, loud as the bat dying in our washing machine 10 years ago. How it staggered, flapped in its puddle, failing for voice though its mouth was open. Now, this stagger flap to the garage, this bubble pop of a cork being pulled from another bottle. I'm old enough to feel the ground turn beneath me as I learned it did in the years before I drank. It is for those years I still shut my eyes when the car lurches into the drive, hoping he will whisper my name, lift me up, bump my head off the passenger door, and carry me inside. But I am too old to hear him sing half-forgotten songs seated against the wall next to my bed, too old to be slung over his shoulder. Each night now, he jabs me awake in the car seat each time we list and tilt down that winding path like twin ocean liners about to capsize. I am old enough now to forget the words to the songs we sang, to sound their melody nonetheless. I have 2 stanzas that I have been toying around with as having numerical additions to that poem. Whether or not they will become their own thing or be tied into that poem I haven't really decided yet, but I would love to read part 2 and part 3 of Arun Dukas. My people's history was carried only in song for centuries by the Fili, and it seems the songs continue, but the chorus sings in a place separate from dirging rhythms and tabernacles, songs I could never move to in pews as a child, eyes stinging with incense, too scared over how this life is just a test run for paradise. Morose hallelujahs so different from stiff little fingers, Sham 69, the vibrators, and the Clash, and I was too young then to know what those band names mean. But the music my parents blasted from cassettes sounded like gasoline, made me spin in circles with my tongue out until my bare feet burned red from the rug. We were not meant to struggle with joy. Part 3. If the ancients weren't scared of having their souls captured by the inanimate, maybe I could understand myself better. If Alexandria hadn't burned, maybe I would know what I share with charioteers and Eru. I don't spike my hair with lime paste or paint my naked body with woad. I don't know if we murdered or melded with the Tuatha De Danann, if they reside beyond the ninth wave, or if we committed their bodies to smoke. Cuchulainn was half Fae himself, it said. I don't know if back then the Fili could say things other than I'm fine to those that love them, or sing songs other than I'm fine, but this I do know, that usually I can't feel anything more than the thought of a song inside of me. It's flailing against and with these strands of DNA, dissonant. And I know its rhythms come from a time before the missionaries landed to convince us there were no gods in solstice, salt, nor sea. This next poem I'll be reading is entitled Drift. When she asked me to speak of her son after he had put a hole in his head, I mentioned an afternoon in the basin of the Lehigh Valley, where he told me how glaciers once tilled this earth, how they left sediment in their wake, how millennia later their scattered atoms still hum with traces of their beginning, how his cheeks bulged when he spoke of the migratory patterns of birds with bits of food he forgot to chew, how he used to stretch the collar of his father's sweater over his nose and inhale for something gone. His brown boots are in my garage. Whooping cranes in Buffalo fly 2,500 miles each October to the same refuge in Arkansas. I can hear them outside my window, the harmony of this call and response. I left Pittsburgh after the funeral. When she asked me, I spoke of the valley, of how proud of this ground he seemed, sinking a trowel to its hilt, ranting over glaciers and soil layers, how the remnants of our bodies root themselves in dirt and grass. I still can't make sense of how our minds track sediment through the smell of oiled leather and wool, of how we pace our empty houses like cranes crossing an earth that became familiar. I'll be reading now. I don't often write in classical forms, although I consider rhythm and meter to themselves be a really large part of how I write. But I was trying to explore some ideas of addiction, and I found the classical form, the villanelle, to be a really interesting way to do that because of the repetitive and recursory nature of addiction and how that's mirrored in the form itself. I think you'll see that when I read. It's based a lot on the ideas of repeating refrains. But this poem's called Cab. Nothing can make you ignore what you need. He held his breath as she hangs up her coat. His lungs force open a closed throat to breathe. She pours a glass, bottles spreading like weeds, stuttering slurs getting worse as she spoke. Nothing can make you ignore what you need. It takes 4 minutes to drown in the sea, wet with the thrashing for 8 years, he hopes. Flooded lungs somehow remember to breathe. Her knuckles whip through the meat of his cheek. He knows he'll ignore it, nothing broke. A sink drain alone won't address this need. He carries her to bed each night so she sleeps. Clinging to his arms, she brings her head close. She likes feeling his chest rise as he breathes. She's 2 months dry, but waits for the levees to spring a leak, for this flood to come home. Nothing can make you ignore what you need. Not your soul, not your body's need to breathe. Departing a little bit, I think I'd really like to read a poem that I've tentatively called Siren, which perhaps might be on the nose, perhaps not. I think it's easy to get caught whenever you're revising something for months, to honestly just feel like everything you've written is too on the nose. So I don't know. I try to revise myself out of not writing, which is hard to do in and of itself, but this is one I've been toying with for a long time. It's called Siren, and it takes place in a place where I live that's very dear to me, called Parakia Paros. There is a conch shell in the mail from you. Your note reads, "Can you hear it? Sincerely, Dana." I want to see the Aegean scatter moonlight tonight like a sunken graveyard of lost coins. I want every wave to toss brightness in my face until light drips from my chin. There are nights here where the rain comes down like nails, and I can almost hear the storms pouring themselves back into the sea, the running of water over stone roof and cobblestone. I need this downpour to hammer itself into every crease and pour. Again, I dream of being washed away and returning as someone I used to be. I dream of water soaking our bodies until we can't be told apart. As this flesh dries up, as it peels and cracks away, I will take up your shell, its spiral grooves worn smooth in a sea that used to be ours, and I will hold it to my ear. I will listen for the rain, and after, the echo of those who threw their bodies off the sides of bridges and beds, ship deck railings, and the edges of the waters that end in need of answer. I think to go along with that theme, I will read just a few more poems that relate to kind of Greece or filled with imagery from Greece in general. Negative. The ferry carries lemons and myself, but no figs across the Aegean. I cannot forget leaving before they swell, how flesh never met tongue, fruit never met basket, despite months in the groves waiting for the time's ripening. Dear action and consequence, lightning and boiling sap, tell me about rivers flooding over crops and what a brush fire leaves after a spark. Tell me why absence lodges deeper into the brain than being, why my nights are seen through the space between your hand and mine. I struggle for life and succeed by degrees. I struggle for presence amidst fig and memory, pregnant bulb and veined leaf. I measure each kilometer the ferry travels, bearing me farther from fruit, always afraid of its distance to dirt. Let's see. This next poem is called Meanwhile. She moves like water through his mind, forming canyons and streams, cut banks and trenches, where constancy of reflection has worn him down to silt. The glare coming off the uniformly painted white walls and blue roofs of the village coming through a stone-cut window. Rolled cigarettes of lavender, mullein, tobacco, and maiden's hair. Her attempts to make him quit laid on the table. He is making a meal with what was left in the pantry, and he has ground down deeper into the muddy paths he knows, falling for the same woman again and again over dark bread and honey. This next poem is called Fratricide. I have a epithet from the brothers in the band The Black Crows, who notoriously clashed often, but it's from a song of theirs called Wiser Time, and it reads, "On a good day, you know I wish it was every day that we can part the sea. And on a bad day, I said I know it's not every day. Glory just beyond our reach. Brother, for too long we've been a corpse, draped in our father's once white Bob Marley tee, covered now in puddles of rusted blood. I found it the other week, buried in the garage beneath his workbench, a reliquary buried in the bowels of a crypt, a memento of our clash, and I wonder, did you recognize his scent as he held it to the snapped bridge of your nose? It's been almost 5 years since the field in Sandy Lake, since you explained with the self-righteous fervor of a blackout the many ways I had wasted my life, since I sought violence with that same fervor as a recourse for when words fail. It was the way you held my head down in the mud, your knee planted in my back, but never striking a blow, a form of love that you couldn't break. Do you know how many years I've spent staring at the knuckles of my hand since, wondering what happens to a soul when it betrays what it loves? We broke us that night, but from atrium to ventricle, before and after your daughter's birth, we try to raise a cathedral to what we were and are, hoping the sun might start to peer through an unfinished clerestory, glinting off the skin of our childhood. May our ribs hold vaulted domes. May we craft stained glass out of sea stone from Hatteras and the home security systems of shattered beer bottles cemented atop the walls of Puerto Vallarta. Do you remember? Light will pour through in blues and greens. Archways will rise from our ruin. One morning, may we come to ourselves as pilgrims. May we peer into the apse and note the crypt was exhumed, our bodies used for raw materials to form the lattice work woven into these pillars. May we manage together to find our own way, our own calculations, to make stand this once impossible dome. This next one I'll read for you is called Lullaby. For some reason, I keep waking between one scar and the next. Your IV drip, the coffee pot refilled, parts of a hamstring, metal pins. I could have torn off the cheap siding before you moved in. Become the wall I painted over, the maple almost bare. I sleep under a falling rock on the quiet water, clink of your urn on the railing, tide's pretense of return, this record stuck on a loop, willow birds incessant, the chirping heart for some reason long gone flat. I have just a few more I would like to read for you. This next one is called Heap. Take me back to the crash, as happy as I am to be done with the pill bottle fogs, to walk to the bathroom without being planted like a fern on the toilet. As happy as I am looking through windows, knowing I'm not bound to the chair, take me back to the crash. Take me to the right after, where the truck drives through me, where the windshield splinters. Take me to the seconds when street lamps hang from sidewalks and I fall through the rain. Take me back to when I was twisted on the asphalt, when the eardrum burst, when the leg snapped, when I didn't feel a thing, but knew this was my body and this was me breathing. This next one is a ekphrastic. It's something we did during my Techniques of Poetry class in the first semester. And they were all based off this Austrian surrealist painter named Hugo Simberg. And this is after staring at, for what I think was too long, this painting of his entitled Nightmare. I need to stop writing elegies for lovers that left. I hate the pieces of me they keep more than what they leave. It's easier to write that they're dead. So I sow bleak fields with monuments to those I've unwrapped, and supines stay tangled within the faded edges of whomever I never got outside of. I wish acceptance of loss didn't double for surrender in my mind. I wish the sky was not always trying to get closer to the ground. Maybe space could be found for something besides shadow and sand, and besides these miniature departures I write, for more life amidst all this pity and stone. And let's see, I'll read another ekphrastic, and then I think I just have one more poem to leave you folks with, hopefully on a slightly more upbeat note than what I feel like many of my poems are about. In my poetry, I feel like I'm always trying to celebrate the moments in my life that I find worth celebrating. And too often when I read them in a large group like this, I look back and I think like, wow, people are gonna think that you have been sad for like 30 years. But I think, well, it's a very Irish thing, but I think you have to celebrate the sadness along with the beauty. So this specific ekphrastic was written after staring at Simberg's fantasy. I called it Athens once. Leave Bulgaria and live with me in Greece again. Pray with me before red hotel bed sheets in Iliopoli for the dead on Easter. Choke asthmatically with me on incense flooding the streets at night after Barry walks us through the ruins of his friend's life. Here is where they lived, by groves. While Michiko was dying of stomach cancer, he explains to me that Jack did not trust the Greek doctors to know anything but God. Tell me how you pray, Dana, for souls to keep existing as refractions given off by crystal. Tell me of your serene conviction that the pain of being that much alive was part of God's gift. How it explains your insistence on dressing always as if in mourning. Shut your eyes once more as I try to make sense of why you ever chose to grace my foreground. I want to thank you all for listening, and I will read one more poem for you. This poem, I originally published it in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, which does something rare for a city paper in that every Saturday it publishes a poem. I think just having a poetry column in a city paper, one, is extremely rare. And I was really happy that in 2014 they launched a project creating an anthology of selected poems from the last 30 years of the paper's run. And they also found several local artists to read the works of poets and to try to create paintings and sculptures inspired by those. But I was really glad and felt very honored to have this poem selected to make that anthology called Verse Envisioned. But yeah, it is called The Author Wishes to Acknowledge. I suppose you want thanks now for the fact the truck didn't crush that my head, just the knee, or you want thanks that I'm walking again. I'm sure you wouldn't mind a nod for the Carolina rains, the screws in my leg, the way my heart stops at an engine's backfire, at shouts of children on the beach. I'll tell you what, let me stare out of the window of my old cabin and walk without crutches through the overgrown grass. Let me stop dreaming of headlight halos and hurtling through the air, the broken windshield, the blood on the asphalt, the puddles that were mine and the ones that weren't. Let me go back to Kamakura to watch the trains ramble, the leaves fall, and burn my tongue on hot fried squid under the Buddha on the hilltop. When I get home, I swear, I'll lie naked with tears on my cheeks, the blankets flung from the bed. I will whisper to the faded vinyl stars spread across my ceiling, thank you for all of it, for not dying this time before I wake, but mostly, I want to thank you for the slow rivers that look like my mother's skin and how my sister shuts her eyes when she laughs. Thank you again, everyone, for listening. I very much appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a good night.
Hi everyone, my name is Molly Weiland. I am a first year fiction student. I'm going to be reading a work in progress that's a short story called 23 and Me. Victor opened the email and clicked here to view his DNA report. The traits and wellness pages confirmed things he already knew from living in the same box of flesh and bone for the past 23 years. Cheek dimples, preferred salty over sweet, dark brown hair, deep sleeper, below average ability to match musical pitch, attached earlobes, dark brown eyes, moderate unibrow, lactose intolerance, prefers vanilla over chocolate, 9:04 a.m. natural wake-up time, average genetic weight, and on and on and on. Victor rocked onto the back legs of his chair and clicked here to view his ancestry. 31.2% French and German, 35% Spanish and Portuguese, 28.1% Native American, 1.7% Senegambian and Guinean, 4% unassigned. Victor felt the familiar pang of missing his mom somewhere beneath his lungs. Ever since he was tiny, she would say, "From the moment I adopted you, I knew you had some Spanish blood in you." In school, Victor had always wondered about this as he passed the Spanish-speaking kids' lunch table. If his birth parents had spoken Spanish, wouldn't there be some deeply embedded part of him that would recognize his ancestors' tongue and make it feel more like home? Yet, when he heard them speak, he understood nothing, recognized nothing. Fuck, Victor thought. How did he let the weed run out last night? That was like his one job. He sighed and clicked here to view his ancestry composition report. The rainbow pie charts told him that his maternal ancestors came from Western Europe, highly likely France or Germany. His paternal ancestors came from Central America, highly likely Guatemala. Victor tried to conjure up images of his birth parents. If he saw his birth mother today, sitting at a red light or pumping gas or in line at the grocery store, would the part of his newborn brain that was there in the hospital bed know it was her? In fourth grade, all the kids had to do a project about their ancestry. Victor and his mom didn't have any information about his birth parents, so his mom wrote a note to the teacher explaining that it had been a closed adoption and Victor would have to do his project on his adopted family's ancestry. When he presented to the class, he heard a kid in the front whisper, "There's no way he's that white." Victor's face burned, and he stuttered through the rest of the presentation. As he clicked through his results, Victor tried to remember if anyone had given a report on their Guatemalan ancestors that day in 4th grade, but he came up blank. There was a skinny soccer-playing kid who came in middle school, Javier, whose family had immigrated from somewhere, but Victor thought it was Panama. What did a Guatemalan even look like? Ugh, it was just like Franny to make Victor think all deep about his identity and shit, and she wasn't even here to see the results. She bought him the DNA test kit for Christmas last year after his mom died of ovarian cancer. Franny said it might help his healing process if he found out where he came from, like originally, before the adoption. Franny was majoring in psychology and was very into telling Victor what would heal him. She tried to get him back into community college after his mom died, but he couldn't because he felt like a different person. Watching his mom die slowly had turned him into someone who could no longer do things or become things. Franny broke up with Victor a few months after his mom's death, after he got fired from the gas station for showing up late too many times in 1 week and had to apply for unemployment. As Victor understood it, that was Franny deeming him beyond healing. The thing about no school and no job was that it was really boring. Victor was averaging 12 hours of sleep on the nights that it came, 6 hours of YouTube, 5 blunts, 4 rounds of jacking off, and 3 bowls of ramen a day. So, a few weeks ago, he decided to dig the DNA test kit out of the back of his closet. He spit in a tube and got his results back 2 weeks later. Victor leaned back in his chair again and cracked his knuckles. He clicked here to view his DNA relatives overview. Victor, you share DNA with 942 other customers, including 1 close relative. Of all the days to run out of weed, Victor thought, and turned off the monitor. To prepare for this moment, Victor had procured weed, smoked said weed, ate a bowl of ramen and a family-sized bag of Takis, sampled several recently uploaded big-ass videos on Pornhub, jealousy stalked several high school acquaintances turned recent college grads on Facebook, and paced across his apartment in his boxers and socks for nearly an hour. Then he turned on the monitor. His 941 distant relatives and 1 close relative were patiently waiting for him, just as he had left them the day before. Victor hovered his cursor over the words "1 close relative" and tried to remember what family felt like. Maybe this 1 close relative could help him get that feeling back. It had been only about a year since his mom's death, but their sense of normalcy had died long before that. He tried to think of a time before the diagnosis, before they had to sell the house he grew up in and move into this shitty apartment, before the deaths of both his mom and grandma had left him so profoundly alone. The memory that usually came to him most easily was one of an uneventful Christmas morning. He must have been a freshman or sophomore in high school, back when the presence of his mother and grandmother had been a constant, fixed as if things would stretch on this way for eternity. Victor's grandmother had lived with them for as long as he could remember. Her husband, Victor's grandfather, had passed away when Victor was a small child, and Victor's mother had taken her in without question. She passed away of old age shortly before the diagnosis, as if God had decided to spare her the grief of having to watch her only daughter become a shell of herself. That Christmas morning, nearly 10 years ago, the way the light reflected off the snow and shone through the French windows of their old house had given everything a soft, ethereal quality, as if it was part of a dream. His grandma had been on one side of the couch, wrapped up in a red blanket she had recently crocheted. She used both hands to hold her coffee cup up to her chin and murmured, "Oh, how wonderful," in response to every gift that was opened. Victor's mom was in her plaid pajamas on the other side of the couch, nearly squealing as she tried to contain her excitement for Victor to open his gifts between them. Victor had rolled his eyes at her display in the way that teenage boys do, but he loved being at the center of her world, and she knew it. She was on the lookout for Christmas gifts year-round, always finding something at an antique shop or an art show that reminded her of Victor or his grandmother in some abstract way that Victor didn't fully understand. He wished now that he could remember what he had opened that morning. He should have known to appreciate the delicateness of that moment while he was still there inside of it. Victor took a deep breath and finally clicked here to view his DNA relatives. The list contained mostly fourth and fifth cousins who shared about 0.28% of his DNA. But there at the very top of the page was his one close relative, represented by a purple dot with the initials HL and the following information. Name, Heather Lyons. Strength of relationship, aunt, 25.2% shared DNA. Side, maternal. Sharing with other customers, yes. Victor felt a tiny hamster scamper through his stomach and up toward his esophagus. He swallowed a little throw up and clicked on the message button. He gazed longingly at the pipe on the corner of his desk. No, he told himself. No more weed for you until you fucking do it. Hi, Heather, Victor wrote. I think I'm your nephew. They agreed to meet halfway 2 days later in a dim, nearly empty pub known for its selection of 1,000 varieties of beer and bourbon. Victor sat at a sticky table in the back corner, scrolling through Twitter and wondering if she would show. Heather had suggested this pub, said this was the spot when she was in her 20s. It was about a 30-minute drive for each of them. A few minutes later, the woman who must have been Heather rushed through the swinging doors, holding her keys and sunglasses in one hand and an oversized navy tote bag in the other. She immediately spotted Victor and headed straight for his table. Oh my God, I feel like I'm in a movie, Heather exclaimed in the voice of a heavy smoker. She hugged Victor's head and neck while he was still seated, then held his face out in front of her with both hands. She smelled like cigarettes and perfume, but Victor didn't mind it. You have your mom's chin, you know that? Heather said, pinching it between her thumb and pointer finger. Well, no, I suppose you wouldn't know that. You got your dad's coloring, though, I'll tell you that much. You look like a Mexican. She chuckled and gave his cheeks a squeeze, too. Victor let out a nervous laugh. You're shy, too, ain't you? Didn't get that from your mom, neither. No, sir. Heather said, Hey, I'm grabbing a drink. If two people ever needed a couple drinks, it's us right now, huh? She snorted. I'll get you one too, yeah? Victor gave a half nod and smile. Thanks, he said. He watched Heather order from the bald bartender. The blue backlight of the bar illuminated her acne scars and heavily hairsprayed platinum blonde waves. Victor guessed she was in her mid-40s and wondered how old that would make his mom. Heather came back to the table and handed a glass to Victor. Got us some Jim Beam. That okay for you? She asked. Victor cleared his throat and nodded. Thanks again. He couldn't remember the last time he drank anything besides cans of PBR. Oh, don't mention it. Not every day I meet my long-lost nephew, huh? She smiled and clinked her glass against his. Then her face went serious. I gotta tell you, kid, I wanted to meet you because I want to do right by my sister. Well, that, and I was curious because who wouldn't be? But anyway, I want to make sure you're doing all right. Your mom loved you and wanted you to have a good life. Loved? Repeated Victor, feeling faint. He took off his sweatshirt. Heather sighed an exaggerated sigh and looked up at the ceiling. Yeah, I suppose you don't know, do you? She put her hand on Victor's forearm. I really didn't want to tell you this on the internet, kid, and I sure as hell don't want to tell you now, but your mom is no longer with us. The tiny hamster in Victor's chest scampered from his sternum to his esophagus and back again on repeat. Victor gulped. He closed his eyes and wished for more weed. What happened to her? Oh, it's been a long, long time. Amber's been gone, almost 19 years now, I guess. It was an overdose, Heather said. So I was 4. What was he doing when it happened? How did he not feel it? Victor imagined himself finger painting at preschool or sitting in the dentist chair, stupidly oblivious to the fact that his biological mom was taking her last breath. Heather looked up at the ceiling again, then nodded. Yeah, I guess that sounds right. She was only 17 when she had you, you know. I don't know how you feel about it, but I always thought she did the right thing, giving you up for adoption, you know. That child was in no place to raise a baby, but at least she knew it. Did they find you a good home? Yes, Victor grunted. He willed the tears to stay behind his eyeballs. It was just my mom and grandma. My mom died last year. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Victor wanted to know more about his mom. What her voice sounded like, how she styled her hair, what she liked to play as a kid, how often he crossed her mind in those final years. Anything, everything. But he couldn't bring himself to ask about her without picturing what it must have been like for her at the end, in those final moments. So he just shook his head, as if to dislodge the scene from his mind. What about my dad? Well, I know his name is Marco Solaris, and that's about it. I saw the guy once in passing when he came to pick Amber up from the house. Not a bad guy. Not a bad looking guy back in the day, I'll tell you that much. How did they meet? Oh, just at some bar, Heather said, waving her hand. Your mom had a fake ID. She was always a wild one, you know. Marco looked a bit older. I'm not sure he knew how old she was at the time. She had a body, you know. She drew curves in the air, then laughed. I guess I should watch my mouth, huh? This is your mom we're talking about after all. Victor shifted in his seat and took a sip of bourbon. She never told him about the pregnancy, if that's what you're wondering, Heather said. They only saw each other for a month or two. It was never meant to last, I guess. Victor felt like he was listening to his heart through a stethoscope. So my dad is still out there? I mean, he's probably out there somewhere, yeah. I suppose he'd be well into his 40s by now, Heather said, slowly nodding. No idea if he'd want to be found, though. Like I said, I only ever saw the guy in passing. Victor tore tiny chunks off the napkin in front of him, trying to picture his dad like so many times before. Shouldn't he come clearer now that he knew his name? Hey, kid, said Heather, nudging him with her foot. Victor looked up. What about you? You doing all right in life? Got a girlfriend, job, what? Victor shrugged. Nah. Heather pitied him with her eyes. Well, that's no good. No, sir, we gotta do something about that. She rocked back in her chair. Well, what do you want? What are your goals, your wildest dreams? She asked, waving her hands in the air. Victor shrugged again. I wanted to be a doctor, but we didn't have the money for that. I was at a community college to become a medical assistant up until my mom got sick. Well, you just gonna sit around and mope for the rest of your life, or what? I guess. I don't know. They sat in silence for a moment. Are you gonna tell people about me? Asked Victor. Heather sighed and lowered her voice. This has to stay between us, kid. You hear me? Why? My mom, she said. She's an old woman now. She's fragile, sick. Bringing up Amber would just upset her. She never got over it, poor lady. Easier just to pretend it never happened. Oh, said Victor. I'm sorry, kid, but I don't want to rock the boat. I can't rock the boat, if you know what I mean. Victor ripped off a hangnail. Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. I'm real sorry, kid. I'm so sorry. I am. Back at his apartment, Victor smoked the emergency hash he kept in a sock under his mattress, the stuff he reserved for the really, really bad days. In bed, he propped a pillow behind his head and unlocked his phone. You need to do this now before you chicken out, he told himself. You don't get a choice. If Victor had learned anything about himself in the past 6 months, it was that if he gave himself the choice between action and inaction, he would choose inaction nearly every single time. Messaging Heather had been the first step, and although he didn't get the news he wanted, he knew he had to use this inertia or risk falling back into a hole he might never get out of again. He Facebook searched the Marco Solarises in his area. Really old, wrinkly guy holding a lizard? Nope. Middle schooler wearing a grill? Nope. 20-something in a cap and gown? Nope. 40-something headshot in a suit and tie? Maybe. Victor clicked on him. Works at McCaskill Medical Products Incorporated, studied at UW Parkside, lives in Caledonia, birthday's April 25th, 1973. He did the math. 46 years old, 25 miles away. It could be him. It could be. Victor clicked on his profile picture, zoomed in on this Marco Solaris' face, about 2 shades darker than his own. The face wasn't familiar, but those ears, Victor felt his own, kind of pointed at the top. His mom had affectionately referred to them as his elf ears. Marco Solaris had them too. The tiny hamster in Victor's chest did backflips from one lung to the other. Victor Googled McCaskill Medical Products Marco Solaris and clicked on the first link. It brought up the same headshot from Facebook. He was a medical supply sales representative, been there since 2009. Victor Googled Marco Solaris, Caledonia, Wisconsin white pages and clicked on the first link. There were 11 records. Victor found the Caledonia one in his 40s and clicked here to view the details. There was an address. Victor Google Maps 204 Whitegate Drive, Caledonia, Wisconsin. He saved the address to his phone, finished the open bag of munchies on his nightstand while watching Adventure Time, and fell asleep. When Victor woke up, it was storming harder than it had all year. There was an overwhelming part of him that wanted to just give up and weave himself into the fibers of the blankets, that tried to use the rain as a way to say that today was not the day. Victor used all the strength he had left to ignore that part of himself, to not give himself the choice. He pulled on a black hooded sweatshirt and, between claps of thunder, ran out to his car, shielding his face from the rain with his palm. Victor punched the address into his phone and drove nearly blindly through the rain and lightning. The wipers were on as high as they could go, but it was as if they didn't even exist. He had the feeling of being in a high-powered car wash, of being assaulted by force on all sides, yet being powerless to change any of it. As Victor's car slowed to a crawl near the house, the sky suddenly cleared. The storm didn't stop gradually as storms normally tend to do. No, the clouds, the rain, the thunder simply ceased to exist, as if he'd driven through some sort of force field. Now the sun was shining, birds were singing, and people on the street were out walking their dogs and mowing the lawn. Victor gripped the steering wheel to ensure that it was still solid. When it was, he gave himself permission to look around. This was it. 204. White Cape Cod, blue shutters, hanging flower baskets on the front porch. A U-Haul in the driveway and boxes stacked by the opening of the attached garage. The manicured lawn was surrounded by tall, carefully groomed hedges. Everything had that soft, ethereal quality, the same one he saw when he thought of that Christmas morning back in high school. Victor inched along the hedges so he could maintain some cover but still see through a gap between them. He turned off the car and rolled down his windows halfway. He felt like a criminal sitting outside this stranger's house, but he just had to see for himself. What exactly he was expecting to see, he wasn't sure. Just a glimpse of the house that housed his possible father and possible family. Maybe a clue or two as to what kind of person Marco Solaris was. A clue to what kind of person Victor Gayhart was supposed to be. Victor heard male voices move into the attached garage. He lowered his head so he could just see barely over the steering wheel. The voices came out of the garage. Victor saw Marco Solaris' head poking over the top of an oversized black leather chair, which he carried toward the U-Haul with a guy about Victor's age. He looked familiar. The tiny hamster in Victor's chest started doing the backstroke. He swallowed hard. "You sure you have room for this thing in your new place?" Victor heard Marco Solaris say to the younger one, over the top of the chair. Marco Solaris looked to be about average height, his t-shirt stretching right tight across his chest and biceps. He wore gym shorts and Nike Air Maxes. Something seemed strange about the way his words came out, the way they sounded when they hit the air. "Yeah, I'm sure," the younger one grunted. They heaved the chair into the U-Haul. "Okay, well, you're on your own moving this thing out, my son. Your dad is getting too old for this." Marco Solaris ran his hands across each other twice like, "Not my problem." His words were like music. Yeah, okay, we'll see about that, teased the younger one. Taller and lankier, he had Victor's build and had the same shaggy haircut, or lack thereof. You getting smart with me now, huh? Think you're a big man now that you're moving to the East Coast? Marco Solaris put the younger one in a playful headlock. The younger one laughed and struggled to get out. Victor felt a pang of longing in his chest. Then he realized what it was about the words. They were speaking Spanish. Every word of it, Spanish, and Victor understood them perfectly. The words felt like home. Before Victor could get over this discovery, he saw a short, middle-aged blonde woman come out of the house, wiping her hands on her bright pink apron. He recognized her face, her chin. It was his own. "How's the packing going?" she called in English. "Come here, my boy." She held her arms out and motioned for the younger one, who sauntered across the yard to her embrace. Marco Solaris followed, shaking his head and smiling. "Our son, the future doctor," the woman said, rocking her son back and forth in a hug. "I'm so proud of you, my son. I love you so much." "Okay, Mom, okay," laughed the son, shooing out of her embrace. "We have to finish packing." The son walked back to the pile of boxes by the garage. "Dad, help me," he called, again in Spanish. He gestured toward a particularly large box. "This one is heavy." Marco Solaris picked up one side of the box and his son picked up the other. "Our son Victor," Marco Solaris said, as if tasting the words. "The future doctor." Victor turned the keys in the ignition and stepped on the gas. Before he turned the corner, he glanced in the rearview mirror to see if they had noticed him. They hadn't. He merged onto the freeway and kept driving east and didn't look back. The sun was still shining ahead. That's all I have for tonight. Thank you for listening, and I hope everyone has a great night.